The veil slipped through Layla's trembling fingers when she first saw the sheik. The pale fabric fluttered like a lost butterfly between the marble columns, and for an instant, just an instant, their eyes met through the golden light filtering through the palace windows. He stood at the top of the staircase, motionless as a statue, but there was something in his clear blue gaze that made her feel as if her entire life before had been merely preparation for that moment. Before we delve into this story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The desert air still carried the scent of spices and myrrh when Layla first crossed the main gate. Her simple leather sandals made a discreet echo against the polished stone floor, a sound that seemed amplified by the reverent silence hanging over that place. She kept her eyes lowered as she had been taught, but even so, she could perceive the grandeur that surrounded her. Carved pillars rising like marble trees, inner gardens where water murmured in unseen fountains, silk fabrics dancing softly with the afternoon breeze. Layla was the daughter of Karim Tajer, the merchant who had once been respected throughout the region, but whose greed led him to attempt to defraud the sheik himself in a precious stone transaction. The dishonor that befell her family was like a sandstorm, swift, devastating, impossible to avoid. Now, 2 years later, she was there to settle her father's moral debt through the only means left to them, offering her services in the home of the man her father had tried to cheat. The agreement had been made by the city's elders. Layla would serve in the palace for 2 years, enough time for the family's honor to be considered restored. No one expected this 23-year-old woman, known for her reserved nature and her skilled hands with needle and thread, to attract any special attention. It was meant to be a silent penance, fulfilled in the shadow of the great events that moved Sheikh Assad's kingdom. But fate had other plans. Assad bin Rashid had governed those lands for 15 years since his father's death. At 40, he was known as much for his justice as for his firmness, a man who could maintain peace among rival tribes through a combination of political wisdom and personal strength that few dared to challenge. He had lost his wife 5 years prior, a sweet and fragile woman who succumbed to a fever that doctors could not cure, and since then had remained alone, dedicating himself entirely to his duties as ruler. No one in the palace expected him to take an interest in a servant, especially a servant whose family had tried to deceive him. But when Assad saw Layla on that first day, when her veil slipped and revealed not just a face of serene beauty, but eyes that carried a dignity that family disgrace had failed to break, something within him awakened after years of dormancy. It wasn't desire, not immediately. It was recognition, as if he was seeing something he had lost long ago and only now realized he missed. In the first few days, Layla was assigned to work in the inner gardens and sewing areas, away from the main halls where the sheikh conducted the kingdom's business. She woke before dawn, when the air was still cool and the stars began to fade in the brightening sky, and went to the gardens, where she tended the roses that perfumed the palace's private chambers. It was silent, meditative work. Her hands, accustomed to the fine fabrics she used to embroider in her father's house, quickly adapted to caring for plants. There was something comforting in the routine. The fresh earth between her fingers, the morning dew on the petals, the sweet fragrance that intensified with the day's heat. It was a simple life, very different from the luxury she had been accustomed to, but there was peace in it. The other servants observed her with curiosity and a hint of distrust. Layla wasn't like them. She hadn't been born into that life, didn't carry the natural humility of someone who had always served. There was something in her posture, in the way she held her head high, even when carrying heavy baskets or kneeling to pull weeds, that reminded everyone she came from a different station. "She thinks too highly of herself," muttered Amira, one of the older maids, as she watched Layla work in the garden. "Just because her father was rich before he tried to steal from the sheik." "She doesn't think anything of herself," Zara, a young woman who had arrived at the palace around the same time as Layla, retorted. "She's just different. Look how she tends the roses, as if each one were special." And it was true. Layla treated every plant, every flower, every leaf with an attention that went beyond duty. There was love in those gestures, a gentleness that transformed the work into something that seemed like art. It was this same gentleness that caught Assad's attention. He was on the terrace of his private quarters on an especially hot afternoon, observing the palace activity below, when he saw her. Layla was kneeling beside a jasmine bed, her hands moving with extreme care as she transplanted a sapling that seemed to be dying. There was something in her concentration, in the infinite patience with which she worked, that made him stop and observe. Assad watched her for several minutes. He saw how she spoke softly to the plant as she worked, as if encouraging it to live. He saw the delicacy with which she handled the fragile roots, the genuine concern when some yellowed leaves fell into her hands. And when she finally finished transplanting and sat back on her heels to admire her work, Assad saw the small, satisfied smile that lit up her face. It was a private, intimate smile. The smile of someone who finds joy in small victories that no one else sees. Assad descended to the garden without much thought about what he was doing. His footsteps were silent on the stone paths, but Layla must have sensed his presence nonetheless, because she turned when he was just a few feet away. When she saw him, the color drained from her face. Quickly, Layla stood up and bowed her head in a deep curtsy. Her hands, still dirty with earth, trembling slightly by her sides. "My lord," she murmured, not daring to lift her eyes. Assad stopped before the jasmine bed and looked at the small sapling she had transplanted with such care. "This plant was dying," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Yes, my lord, but I believe it can still be saved. Sometimes they just need a new place, different care." There was something in the way she spoke, without looking at him directly, but with clear conviction in every word, that touched Assad in an unexpected way. It wasn't flattery or the respectful fear he usually heard from servants. It was genuine opinion, offered with simplicity. "And you believe you can save it?" "I'll try, my lord. It deserves a chance." Assad looked again at the plant, a small, seemingly insignificant sapling, and then at Layla, who still kept her eyes down, but no longer trembled. "Why is it important to you? It's just a flower." For the first time, Layla raised her gaze slightly, and Assad saw that her eyes were a deep green, like the leaves of ancient olive trees. "My lord, my grandmother always said that nothing that fights to live is just anything. Every life has value, even the small ones." Assad remained silent for a long moment, studying her face. There was sincerity there, but also strength. The same quiet dignity he had noticed on the first day, only more evident now that she had spoken. "What is your name?" "Layla, my lord, daughter of Karim Taja." Assad nodded. He knew the story, of course. He knew the name of the dishonest merchant and the circumstances that had brought his daughter to his palace. But the young woman standing before him didn't seem to carry the weight of shame he would expect. There was something more, an acceptance of the situation, but not a complete submission to it. "You take good care of plants," he said finally. "Thank you, my lord." Assad hesitated, as if about to say something more, but then simply nodded and walked away. Layla remained motionless until his footsteps disappeared completely, only then allowing herself to breathe normally again. That brief conversation subtly changed the palace routine. Assad began to appear in the garden more frequently, always with some justification, checking the progress of the roses, inspecting the irrigation system, talking to the head gardener about the next season's planting. But Layla noticed that invariably he would end up stopping near where she was working. At first, their conversations were brief and formal. He asked about the plants. She replied with respect, but without elaborating much. Gradually, however, the questions became more specific, more interested. Assad discovered that Layla had learned about gardens from her grandmother, a wise woman who cultivated medicinal herbs and knew which plants thrived in what kind of soil. He discovered that she had studied with private tutors before her father's disgrace, that she could read and write and had well-formed opinions on poetry and philosophy. "Have you read Rumi?" he asked one afternoon, after she casually mentioned a verse about the patience of roses. "Yes, my lord. My tutor used to say that poetry teaches us to see with different eyes." "And what do you see when you look at these roses?" Layla hesitated, as if deciding how much honesty she could allow herself. "I see resilience," she finally said. "They grow in a desert, but they remain beautiful. They remain fragrant, as if they refuse to let circumstances change their nature." Assad watched her as she spoke, noting how her eyes lit up when she touched on subjects that interested her. There was intelligence there, a vivacity of spirit that contrasted with the seriousness of her situation. "And you?" he asked impulsively. "Can you maintain your nature despite the circumstances?" The question caught Layla by surprise. She looked at him directly for the first time in weeks, and Assad saw something vulnerable in those green eyes. "I'm learning, my lord," she said softly. That night, Assad stayed awake very late on the terrace, looking at the stars and thinking about her answer. There was honesty in her admission that she was learning, a refusal to pretend the situation was easy, but also a determination to find a way to thrive despite it. It was exactly the kind of courage he respected. Weeks passed, and the conversations between Assad and Layla grew longer, more personal. He discovered that she missed the books from her father's library, that before her family's disgrace, she had begun to write her own poems, that she dreamed of traveling to big cities where they said there were hanging gardens that defied the laws of nature. She, in turn, began to see in him more than just the feared and respected Sheik. Assad was intelligent in a way that went beyond political astuteness. He was genuinely curious about the world, about people, about the small things that made life beautiful. There were moments when he laughed at something she said, and in those moments he seemed much younger, almost vulnerable. "You weren't always Sheik," she said one afternoon, an observation that surprised her as much as him with its boldness. Assad laughed. "No, not always. There was a time when I was just the second son, free to pursue my own interests. I wanted to be a merchant, travel the world, get to know different cultures." "What changed?" "My older brother died in a battle against bandits who attacked our trade caravans. Suddenly I was the heir, and there was no longer a choice." There was sadness in his voice, a longing for a life he never had the chance to live. "Do you regret it?" Assad considered the question carefully. "I cannot regret fulfilling my duty to my people, but sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to have that freedom of choice." Layla nodded, understanding better than he imagined. She too had lost her freedom of choice when her father's actions determined her fate. "Perhaps freedom isn't about having choices," she said thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's about finding something of value in the path we are forced to take." Assad looked at her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. There was admiration there, but also something deeper, more unsettling. "You are wise for someone so young," he said. "My lord, Hardship teaches us things that ease never could. It was true, and both knew it. The difficulties each had faced, he losing freedom for duty, she losing status due to her father's dishonor, had shaped perspectives that more sheltered people would never develop. But something dangerous was growing between them, something both felt, but neither was willing to name. Assad was a powerful sheikh, she a servant in penance. The social chasm between them was immense, almost impassable. And yet with each conversation, each shared glance over a blossoming rose or a star shining brighter in the night sky, that chasm seemed to narrow. The other people in the palace began to notice. Whispers spread like fire through dry straw. "The sheikh is taking an interest in the thieving merchant's daughter," Amira murmured to anyone who would listen. "It's a disgrace, a dishonor to the memory of his late wife." "She must have used magic," another suggested. "There's no other explanation for a man like him to be interested in a criminal." Assad's advisors also began to worry. Omar, the oldest and most respected among them, finally dared to address the matter in a private meeting. "My lord," he said carefully, "the people are commenting on your attention to Karim's daughter." Assad looked at him coldly. "And what exactly are the people saying?" "That you are enchanted by her, that she may be influencing your decisions. There are concerns that this could affect your authority." Assad remained silent for a long moment, his blue eyes fixed on a distant point outside the window. "Omar," he said finally, his voice controlled but tinged with warning, "I have governed this kingdom for 15 years. I have maintained peace, prosperity, and justice. My authority is not based on rumors or the approval of gossips. Yes, my lord, but there are no buts, Omar. I speak to whom I wish when I wish. If this bothers anyone, perhaps they should question why a conversation with a servant threatens their view of my leadership so much." Omar lowered his head, but Assad could see that the conversation was far from over. He knew the murmurs would continue, that the pressure would increase. And he also knew that at some point he would have to make a decision about what Layla truly meant to him. Layla, in turn, was also feeling the pressure. The other servants avoided her or treated her with thinly veiled coldness. Some even suggested directly that she was using her position inappropriately. "You know what people are saying," Zara said one afternoon, the only one who still maintained some friendship with her. "I know," Layla replied, continuing to sew without looking up. "Doesn't it bother you?" Layla stopped sewing and looked at her friend. "What would bother me more, that people talk, or that I stop being true to myself to silence them?" "But Layla, you understand what's happening, don't you? You're falling in love with him, and he's falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time anyone had said aloud what everyone suspected, what both knew to be true. "What if we are?" Layla asked softly. "Then you're both heading for a tragedy," Zara said sadly. "He's the sheikh. You're the daughter of a man who tried to steal from him. No matter what you feel, the world will never allow it." Layla knew her friend was right. There were nights when she lay awake thinking exactly that, analyzing every word Assad had said, every glance that had lasted a second longer than appropriate. She was falling in love, slowly but irreversibly, with a man who was beyond her reach, and the worst part was she was almost certain he felt the same way. The confirmation came on a stormy night, when the desert wind brought heavy clouds that poured torrential rain over the palace. Layla was running through the gardens, trying to protect the most delicate plants, when Assad appeared to help her. Together they worked in silence, moving pots to covered areas, tying down branches that swayed violently in the wind. The rain drenched them completely, plastering their clothes to their skin, making Layla's hair escape from the veil she had long since stopped wearing in his presence. When they finally finished and took shelter under an archway, both were breathless, dripping, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. It was then that Asad looked at her, really looked, his eyes scanning her wet face, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks, her green eyes shining with the amusement of the moment, and something shifted. "Layla," he said, his voice husky. She turned to him, and the laughter died on her lips when she saw the expression on his face. There was nothing casual or appropriate in that gaze anymore. It was pure need, raw and honest desire that he was no longer trying to hide. "My lord," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. Asad moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. "Tell me I'm crazy, that this is impossible, that I should walk away." Layla looked at him, the powerful man, feared by some, respected by all, who now stood before her completely vulnerable, waiting for her to save him from himself or condemn him along with her. "I can't," she said softly, and then he kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, laden with weeks of repressed tension, of conversations that had said much more than they seemed, of a desire that both had tried to deny but that now exploded between them like a fire. Asad's hands buried themselves in her wet hair, pulling her closer, while she clung to his shoulders as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly lost all its rules. When they finally separated, both were trembling, but not from cold. "Layla," Asad said, his face still close to hers. I know," she whispered. "Me too." They stayed like that for a long moment, forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, the sound of the rain creating a curtain of privacy around them. Both knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return, and both knew the world would not be kind to them for it. "What are we going to do?" Layla asked. Asad brushed a lock of hair from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't regret this. I can't regret you. Me neither, even knowing it's impossible, dangerous." Asad smiled sadly. "Perhaps the most valuable things always are dangerous." They separated reluctantly, knowing they couldn't stay alone like that any longer without someone noticing. But something fundamental had changed between them. The love that had been slowly growing had finally been acknowledged, named, sealed with that kiss in the rain. And now they would have to figure out what to do with it. In the days that followed, Asad and Layla tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with their bare hands. There was a new intimacy in every glance, an electric current in every accidental touch, a sweet ache in the need to be close and the impossibility of showing it publicly. Asad began to find excuses to be alone with her, asking her opinion on new plantings, requesting her to accompany him on an inspection of the gardens, inventing tasks that required her presence in his private quarters. Layla reciprocated, but both knew they were walking on an increasingly thin tightrope. It was during one of these visits to Asad's chambers that they were discovered. Layla was reorganizing the books in his personal library, a task Asad had created specifically to have a reason to call her there. When Omar entered without warning, he stopped at the door, his eyes registering the proximity between Asad and Layla, the way she quickly pulled away when she saw him enter, the blush that rose to both their faces. "My lord," Omar said, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to speak with you, urgently." Asad nodded, his jaw tense. "Layla, you may go. Thank you for your help with the books." She left quickly, but not before exchanging a worried glance with Asad. Both knew that moment of carelessness could have devastating consequences. When they were alone, Omar wasted no time with pleasantries. "My lord, this needs to stop." Asad turned to him, all traces of vulnerability gone, replaced by the cold authority of the ruler. "What needs to stop, Omar? Your obsession with that woman. The entire palace is talking. The other tribal leaders are starting to question your judgment. There are rumors that you are being influenced by someone whose family tried to harm you. My judgment has never been clearer, Assad said firmly, and I am not influenced by anyone in matters of government. Then what is this? What is she to you? Assad remained silent for a long moment, wrestling with a question he himself hadn't fully answered yet. She is important to me. Important how? As a favorite servant? As a mistress? As... Omar stopped, as if he didn't dare complete the thought. As a woman I respect, Assad said. A woman I admire, a woman whose opinions I value. My lord, you cannot be considering... Considering what, Omar? Be clear in your accusations. Omar took a deep breath. Marriage, my lord. Please tell me you are not considering marrying Karim Taja's daughter. The word hung in the air between them. Marriage. It was something neither of them had said aloud, but which had hovered over every conversation, every stolen kiss, every moment of intimacy. What if I were? Assad asked softly. Omar seemed to lose his breath. My lord, that would be disastrous. Politically, socially, culturally. You are a sheikh. She is. She is what? Intelligent, kind, honorable. Which of these qualities makes her unsuitable to be a leader's wife? She is the daughter of a criminal. Her father tried to steal from you. She is not her father. She came here to repair her family's dishonor, and she has done so with grace and dignity. If I cannot separate the daughter from the father's crimes, what kind of justice does that represent? Omar shook his head desperately. My lord, it is not a matter of justice. It is a matter of political reality. The other leaders will never accept it. The people have followed me for 15 years because they trust my judgment. They will continue to follow me. What if they don't? Assad looked out the window at the kingdom he had governed for so long, the lands he loved, the people whose trust he had carefully built over the years. He knew Omar was right about the risks. He knew that marrying Layla could cause political turmoil, questions about his authority, possibly even rebellions among the more conservative tribes. But when he thought of Layla, of her wisdom, her quiet strength, the way she made him feel complete in a way he hadn't experienced since his first wife's death, the political risks seemed small compared to the alternative of losing her. Omar, he said finally, you have been my loyal advisor for many years. Your concern for my well-being and the well-being of the kingdom is appreciated. But there are some decisions a man must make alone, regardless of the consequences. So you will do it? You will marry her? Assad turned to face him. I have not made that decision yet, but when I do, it will be mine to make. Omar nodded sadly. Then may Allah protect us all. After Omar left, Assad stood alone in his chambers, wrestling with the biggest decision of his life. He knew that choosing Layla could cost him much, possibly everything. But he also knew that losing her would cost him something he wasn't sure he could sacrifice: his soul. Layla, meanwhile, had returned to the gardens, but couldn't concentrate on her work. Her hands trembled as she tried to prune roses, her mind reeling from the expression on Omar's face when he saw them together. She knew consequences were coming. She could feel them in the air like a distant storm. Zara found her there at dusk, sitting among the rose bushes with a lost look. What happened? Her friend asked, sitting beside her. Layla told her about Omar's visit, about the tension she had felt, about the feeling that everything was about to fall apart. You need to end this, Zara said softly, before it's too late. I can't. Yes, you can. For him, for you, for the good of both of you. Layla looked at her friend with tears in her eyes. Zara, I love him. I love him in a way I didn't know was possible. How can I just end this? Because sometimes loving someone means protecting them, even if it means protecting them from yourself. Zara's words echoed in Layla's mind throughout the night. She stayed awake thinking of Assad, of the kind and powerful man who had found in her something that completed him, but who now faced pressures that could destroy everything he had worked for. Would it be fair to allow him to sacrifice his kingdom for her? Would it be true love to accept that he risk his leadership, his authority, possibly even his life, for a feeling the world would never accept? The next morning, Layla made the most difficult decision of her life. She sought Assad in his chambers, where she found him reading reports on tribal matters. When he saw her, his face lit up with that smile that had become so precious to her. "Layla," he said, rising to meet her, "I was thinking of you." "I was thinking of you too," she said, but there was something in her voice that made him stop. Assad studied her carefully. "What's wrong?" Layla took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she possessed. "My lord, I need to ask you for something. Anything. I need you to release me." The words fell between them like stones. Assad stood motionless, as if he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "Release you? From what?" "From my period of service. I know there are still a few months left, but I need to leave." Assad approached her, his blue eyes intense and confused. "Why? What happened? Did someone threaten you?" Layla shook her head, fighting to maintain her composure. "No one threatened me, but I can see what's happening. The whispers, the advisor's concerns, the pressure on you. I cannot be the cause of your ruin." "You are not the cause of anything, you are." "I am the daughter of a man who tried to steal from you," she interrupted, "and no matter how much we try to forget it, the world doesn't forget. It never will." Assad held her hands, his voice desperate. "Layla, I don't care what the world thinks. I don't care what my father was or what yours was. I care about who you are, who we are together." "And who are we, Assad?" she asked, using his name for the first time, an intimacy that made them tremble. "We are two people who love each other but belong to different worlds. We are a beautiful dream that could turn into a nightmare for many people." Assad released her hands and stepped back, running his fingers through his hair in evident frustration. "So that's it? You're leaving because other people disapprove?" "I'm leaving because I love you," Layla said, her voice breaking. "Because I love you too much to let me be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. And if I say I'd rather lose everything than lose you." Layla closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Then I'd say you're not thinking clearly. You have responsibilities, Assad. A kingdom, a people who depend on you. You can't throw that away for me." "Why not? Why is my personal happiness worth less than political expectations?" "Because you're not just an ordinary person. You're a leader, and leaders make sacrifices." Assad stared at her for a long moment, and Layla saw when the reality of what she was saying finally hit him. She saw the pain spreading across his face, the reluctant understanding that she was right. "I don't accept this," he said softly. "You have to accept it." "No, there has to be another way." Layla moved closer to him and touched his face with infinite gentleness. "Perhaps there is. Perhaps in a different world, in a different life, but not in this one." Assad covered her hand with his, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to feel her touch one last time. "Where will you go?" "Far from here. Somewhere I can start anew." "Will you marry another man?" The question came out as a whisper of pain. Layla shook her head. "No, there is no other man for me. There never will be." They stood like that for what felt like an eternity, memorizing each other's faces, engraving that moment before everything changed forever. "I love you," Assad said. "I love you too," Layla replied. "And that's why I have to go." The next morning, Layla left the palace before dawn. Assad had arranged for a safe escort and enough money for her to establish herself in a distant city. He didn't go to say goodbye. Both knew it would make things impossible for them. But he watched her leave from his terrace, a small, solitary figure moving away across the desert, carrying his heart with her. The months that followed were the most difficult of Assad's life. He continued to govern, making decisions, resolving disputes, maintaining the peace he had worked so hard to build. But a part of him had left with Layla, an emptiness that no political responsibility could fill. Omar and the other advisors were relieved, but Assad could see in their eyes that they knew the price he had paid. There was a sadness in their leader that hadn't existed before, an emotional distance that made their interactions more formal, less human. Assad tried to convince himself that he had made the right choice. The kingdom remained stable. There were no revolts or serious challenges to his authority. Politically, the decision to let Layla go had been wise. But on lonely nights on his terrace, looking at the stars that had once witnessed his conversations with her, Assad wondered if political wisdom was worth the slow death of the soul. Layla, in turn, had settled in a coastal city many days' journey from Assad's kingdom. She found work in a wealthy family's home, tending their gardens, and slowly built a new life for herself. It was a simple, quiet life, without great emotions or tragedies, and completely empty without him. She thought of him every day, at dawn, when the sun rose over the ocean, and she remembered how the morning light illuminated his face. At dusk, when the colors of the sky reminded her of the conversations they used to have about poetry and philosophy. At night, when loneliness weighed like a rock in her chest. There were letters she wrote but never sent, words of love and longing that filled page after page, but always ended up burned in the fireplace. She kept in touch with the world through traveling merchants and learned that Assad remained single, that he governed efficiently but without joy, that he had never been seen smiling again. A year passed, then two. Assad governed his kingdom competently, but it was as if the light had gone out within him. He performed his duties, attended to the needs of the people, maintained peace and prosperity, but there were no more informal conversations with subjects, no more strolls through the gardens, no more moments of spontaneity or joy. Omar observed his leader with growing concern. One day, he gathered the courage to address the subject everyone avoided mentioning. "My lord," he said after a particularly long and tedious meeting, "may I make an observation?" Assad looked at him with the tired eyes that had become his trademark. "Speak. You saved your kingdom from political controversy, but you lost your soul in the process." Assad remained silent for a long moment. The soul is a luxury that leaders cannot always afford. "With all due respect, my lord, I disagree. A leader without a soul is merely an administrator, and this kingdom needs more than that." Assad stood and walked to the window, looking at the gardens that had once been the site of his greatest joy, and now were just another responsibility to oversee. "What are you suggesting, Omar?" "Bring her back." The words hung in the air. Assad slowly turned to face him. "You were the most opposed." "I was wrong," Omar admitted. "I thought protecting the political image would be more important than protecting the man behind it. But a kingdom whose leader is spiritually dead is not a prosperous kingdom in the long run." Assad shook his head. "Even if I wanted to, it's too late. She made her choice. She left to protect the kingdom's stability. I can't undo that now." "You can, if that's what you truly desire." Assad looked at his advisor with an expression that blended hope and despair. "What if she refuses to come back? What if she has moved on, found another life? Then you will have tried, and that would be more than you're doing now." That night, Assad stayed awake very late, walking through the palace, visiting the places where he and Layla had conversed, laughed, fallen in love. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have her back, not as a servant, but as his equal, his partner, his wife. The morning brought a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. Assad summoned his most trusted men and announced he would be taking a trip, not an official diplomatic visit, but a personal journey. He left Omar in charge of the kingdom's affairs in his absence and set off with a small escort, following the route Layla had taken 2 years prior. The journey took 5 days, 5 days during which Assad swung between desperate hope and terror that it was too late. What if she had married? What if she had moved on completely? What if she didn't even want to see him? When he finally arrived in the coastal city, Assad left his escort at an inn and went out alone to find her. It wasn't difficult to find information about the young woman who tended the city's most beautiful gardens. Her reputation had spread among the local residents. Assad found her where he expected to find her, in a garden, tending roses with the same delicacy and love he remembered. She was kneeling beside a flower bed, and for a moment he just stood watching, memorizing every detail, the curve of her neck, the serene concentration on her face, the grace of her movements. It was as if the 2 years of separation had never happened. Layla must have sensed his presence, because she turned slowly. When their eyes met, time stopped. She stood motionless for a second that lasted an eternity, and then slowly rose, as if fearing he was a mirage that would disappear if she moved too quickly. "Assad," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. He approached until they were a few feet apart. She was thinner. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't existed before, but she remained the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Layla nodded, though both knew she was far from all right. "And you?" "No," he said honestly. "I haven't been all right a single day since you left." Tears began to stream down her face. "Assad, why are you here?" "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. We decided together. We decided wrong. We let fear decide for us. We let other people define what was possible. But Layla, these 2 years have taught me something important. A kingdom governed by a man who has lost his soul is not a kingdom worth preserving." Layla shook her head. "The reasons I left still exist. I am still who I always was. You are still who you always were." Assad moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're right. You are still the most intelligent, bravest, and most honorable woman I know. And I am still a man who loves you more than his own life. The difference is that now I understand that those are the only things that matter. And your kingdom? Your advisors? What will people say?" Assad smiled, the first genuine smile in 2 years. "Omar sent me here. He said a spiritually dead leader serves no one. As for the rest..." "Layla, I governed wisely for 15 years before I met you. That hasn't changed. If my people cannot accept that I choose a wife based on love and respect instead of political convenience, perhaps they need to question what kind of leader they truly want. What if they rebel? Then I will face it, but I won't face it alone. I will face it with you by my side if you will have me." Layla looked at him, the man who had governed a kingdom, who had enough power to do whatever he wanted, who now stood before her offering everything he had, risking everything he had built, for love. "Assad," she whispered, "are you sure?" In response, he knelt right there in the garden, among the roses she had tended with such love, and took from his pocket a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds, simple but beautiful. "Layla," he said, his voice clear and strong, "will you marry me? Not as the Sheik asking a subject, but as a man asking the woman he loves. Will you face the future with me, whatever it may hold?" Layla looked at the man kneeling before her, offering not just love but true partnership, equal respect, a chance to build something together that was stronger than the circumstances that had separated them. "Yes," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "Yes, I will." Assad slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, a kiss that savored victory over fear, the choice of courage over convention, the triumph of true love over the world's expectations. When they separated, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "What happens now?" Layla asked. Assad held her hands, the ring sparkling in the sunlight. "Now we go home, together, and we face whatever comes, together." The wedding was held 2 weeks later, in a simple but elegant ceremony at the palace. There were murmurs, of course, and some of the more conservative tribal leaders expressed discontent. But when they saw Assad and Layla together, the genuine happiness on the Sheik's face, the dignity and grace with which she assumed her new role, most recognized that there was something special about that union. Layla became not just Assad's wife, but his true partner in government. She brought a different perspective to the kingdom's issues, a sensitivity to the people's needs that came from her own experience of hardship. Together, they implemented reforms that made the kingdom more just, more prosperous, more harmonious. And in the palace gardens, where it all began, they spent their afternoons tending the plants that had witnessed the birth of their love. The roses bloomed more exuberantly than ever, as if they knew they were finally being cared for by two truly happy people. Years later, when they told their story to their children, Assad and Layla always ended it the same way. "Sometimes love demands that we choose courage over convenience, truth over tradition, heart over political prudence. And sometimes, when we are brave enough to make that choice, we discover that the world is more flexible than we imagined, that people are wiser than we expected, and that true love has the power to transform not just 2 lives, but an entire kingdom." The sun set golden over the palace as Assad and Layla walked through the gardens, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally at peace. And the desert wind carried the scent of roses, a fragrance that spoke of love that had overcome all obstacles, of happiness built on the solid foundation of courageous choice. Dear listeners, we hope this story has touched your heart. If you were moved, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most. Every day we bring real stories, full of emotion and humanity. Your voice is part of this universe,